The hospital corridor was bright, public, unforgiving. Olivia Allen stood alone outside the ultrasound room, her name already called. A few steps away, Ethan Allen chose where to stand, and it wasn't beside his wife. His hand rested on another woman's shoulder. Nurses watched. Patients noticed. No one intervened. Olivia said nothing. She didn't ask him to come back. What no one in that hallway knew was that the decision he made in silence had already been recorded by witnesses, by paperwork, and by a truth waiting behind the door he refused to open. If you believe choices matter most when no one thinks they're being judged, don't miss this story. Share where you're watching from and your local time. I rate every comment. And if stories about quiet strength, accountability, and justice resonate with you, consider subscribing. Some moments change lives, not because of what's said, but because of what's revealed later. Olivia Allen learned early that silence could be a form of order. Not the silence of avoidance or fear, but the kind that kept things in place when words only made them unravel. She had practiced it for years without naming it, through long workdays, through polite dinners, where conversations drifted past her without landing, through a marriage that slowly learned to function without listening. By the time she was pregnant, silence had become instinct. The pregnancy had not been easy. Her doctor never used alarming language, but the appointments were frequent, the instructions precise. Rest more, monitor symptoms, don't skip visits. Olivia followed every directive with the same calm discipline she applied to everything else. She kept a notebook in her bag, not for feelings, but for facts. Dates, times, test results, names of technicians. The human body, she understood, responded better to order than emotion. Ethan used to come with her. At first, the early appointments had felt almost ceremonial. He sat beside her, asked questions, nodded seriously at the doctor's explanations. When the nurse printed ultrasound photos, he folded them carefully, as if the paper itself were fragile. Olivia noticed how attentive he looked in those rooms, how present. Then work deadlines appeared. Meetings ran long. Traffic became an excuse. By the second trimester, Ethan's absences arrived with apologies that sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced them in the car before calling. "I'll come to the next one," he said often. "I hate that I'm missing this," he added occasionally. Olivia never argued. She simply wrote down which appointments he missed. It wasn't passive, it was observational. She learned patterns the way some people learned languages. Ethan stopped asking what time her appointments were. He stopped checking his calendar before responding. The apologies shortened. The tone shifted from regret to inconvenience. Still, Olivia went. Alone. The waiting rooms blurred together after a while, soft music, neutral artwork chairs arranged to discourage conversation. She watched other couples, other families. Some men hovered anxiously. Others stared at their phones. Some women arrived with mothers, sisters, friends. Olivia always checked in by herself. The staff noticed. Receptionists greeted her by name. Nurses asked if her partner would be joining later, then stopped asking altogether. No one treated her differently, but small adjustments were made, appointments scheduled efficiently, instructions delivered clearly, no unnecessary chatter. Olivia appreciated the professionalism. It mirrored her own approach. At home, Ethan remained courteous. He asked how she was feeling in general terms. He commented on the house being quiet. He mentioned being tired. Olivia listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't volunteer details unless asked directly. And he stopped asking directly. There were signs she could have confronted. Missed dinners. Phone calls taken in other rooms. A smile he carried into the house that didn't belong to anything inside it. Olivia noticed all of it. She wrote none of that down. Feelings were too imprecise to document. What she did record were facts. The day Ethan canceled an appointment because of a client emergency, Olivia checked the timestamp on the message. It came 37 minutes before the appointment. She wrote that down. The time he promised to reschedule and didn't. The number of appointments she attended alone. the shift from we to you in his language. She didn't feel anger the way she expected to. There was no dramatic internal collapse, no cinematic heartbreak. Instead, there was a steady recalibration. Olivia had always believed that relationships failed loudly through fights, accusations, emotional implosions. This one was failing quietly through absence. By the time her obstetrician recommended a more detailed ultrasound, Olivia already knew Ethan wouldn't be there. The appointment was scheduled weeks in advance. She told him the date. He acknowledged it with a nod that didn't include commitment. She marked it in her notebook and prepared to go alone. What she didn't mark, what she couldn't have known yet, was how final that appointment would become. In the days leading up to it, Olivia moved through her routines with careful precision. She continued working. She organized the nursery space without ceremony. She folded clothes slowly, methodically. She didn't tell anyone outside the marriage how alone she felt, not because she was protecting Ethan, but because she didn't yet need witnesses. Witnesses would come later. Ethan's behavior grew more confident as her silence continued. He mistook it for acceptance. In his mind, the lack of confrontation meant stability. He talked about future plans without looking at her. He spoke of changes as if they required no negotiation. Olivia listened. She noted how often his phone buzzed. She noted how often he stepped outside to answer it. She noted how rarely he noticed her watching. It wasn't that she lacked emotion. It was that she understood timing. Olivia had learned long before this marriage that reacting too early only gave others the chance to rewrite the narrative. So she waited. She let events collect their own weight. The night before the ultrasound, Ethan mentioned he might be late the next day. He said it casually, almost offhand, as if testing how much space he had already taken. Olivia nodded and asked if he needed anything from the store. He didn't. That night, Olivia placed her notebook beside her bag. She reviewed the appointment details. She charged her phone. She set 2 alarms, though she rarely needed one. Sleep came lightly, but without distress. At the hospital the next morning, Olivia checked in and took her seat. The waiting room was fuller than usual. Families came and went. Conversations overlapped. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried. She noticed Ethan enter with another woman. Not immediately. She noticed the shift first, the way heads turned, the way space reorganized itself around their arrival. When she looked up, she saw him standing close to someone who wasn't her. The woman's posture was familiar in a way Olivia hadn't expected, confident, proprietary. Olivia didn't stand. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She watched Ethan choose where to stand. And she wrote down the time. Ethan Allen had always believed himself to be a reasonable man. That was the story he told himself when he justified long hours at work, when he explained his growing distance as stress, when he reframed his impatience as fatigue. Reasonable men, he believed, were entitled to understanding. And understanding, once assumed, required no maintenance. From his perspective, the marriage had not collapsed. It had thinned. Olivia had grown quieter over the years or so, he told himself. She asked fewer questions. She no longer filled the space with reassurance. When she stopped reacting, Ethan didn't interpret it as withdrawal. He interpreted it as relief. Less resistance meant less effort. Less effort felt like peace. Madeline Brooks arrived during that season of thinning. She worked in an adjacent professional circle close enough to understand his language, far enough to feel new. Where Olivia listened, Madeline responded. Where Olivia paused, Madeline leaned forward. She asked about his day and followed up with interest that felt active, almost urgent. Her laughter came easily. Her attention was immediate. Ethan told himself it was harmless. At first, it stayed within boundaries he could still name. Lunches, conversations that drifted personal but never explicit. He reassured himself that it was simply refreshing to be seen again. He never labeled it emotional dependence. He labeled it connection. When Madeline learned Olivia was pregnant, she reacted with practiced sympathy. She didn't withdraw. She didn't accuse. She expressed concern about him. "That must be a lot on you," she said once, her voice low, careful. "You seem exhausted." No one had asked him that in a while. Ethan began staying later at work. He stopped bringing his phone into the bedroom. He learned how to compartmentalize without admitting he was doing it. The human mind, he would later realize, was remarkably skilled at preserving self-image. By the time the pregnancy became more medically complex, Ethan had already stepped into a different emotional geography. Olivia's appointments felt procedural. Madeline's presence felt alive. He told himself he was allowed to choose where he felt most useful. Madeline didn't demand overt decisions. She didn't need to. She simply positioned herself as the person who needed him more. She talked about stress, about feeling overwhelmed, about how hard it was to feel second in anyone's life. Ethan responded instinctively to that framing. He began canceling commitments with Olivia using language that sounded reasonable even to him. Emergencies, client demands, scheduling conflicts. He framed each absence as temporary, as isolated. He never examined the accumulation. Olivia's silence helped. He mistook it for consent. When she stopped reminding him of appointments, he felt spared. When she stopped expressing disappointment, he felt forgiven. He never asked why her calendar remained meticulously full, while his involvement steadily vanished. Ethan's confidence grew in proportion to Olivia's restraint. Madeline noticed this and adjusted accordingly. She began appearing where Olivia once had at social functions, professional events, eventually even places that had once been neutral. She stood close. She made herself visible. She didn't challenge Olivia directly. She didn't need to. The power, as she understood it, was already shifting. Ethan never thought of himself as cruel. He believed cruelty required intention, and he didn't intend harm. He intended convenience. He intended comfort. He intended to avoid conflict. What he failed to understand was that avoidance over time became a form of decision-making. The day of the ultrasound appointment was not marked in his mind as significant. He remembered Olivia mentioning it, but the information didn't settle. By then, his attention had developed selective habits. He focused on what demanded him most urgently. That morning, Madeline texted early. She said she wasn't feeling well. She said she needed him. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't ask directly. She allowed implication to do the work. Ethan hesitated briefly. He considered the appointment. He considered the tension he expected if he went. He considered the relief of choosing the simpler path. He told himself he would make it up to Olivia later. When he arrived at the hospital with Madeline, it felt almost accidental. He framed it as support, not declaration. He didn't intend to make a scene. He didn't consider the optics. He believed context would protect him. He didn't see Olivia at first. When he did, the moment registered as discomfort, not guilt. She was already seated, composed, unreadable. The way she looked at him didn't accuse. It observed. Ethan felt exposed. Madeline noticed the shift immediately. She adjusted her posture, stepped closer, placed a hand on his arm. The gesture was subtle, but definitive. Ethan didn't remove it. In that moment, he made a choice he would later struggle to reframe. When the nurse asked who would be joining the patient, Ethan responded without looking at Olivia. He explained calmly that he was needed elsewhere. The words sounded measured in his own ears. Responsible, controlled. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. He didn't believe he was humiliating anyone. But humiliation didn't require volume. It required visibility. People noticed. A nurse paused longer than necessary. Another patient glanced away too quickly. Madeline's expression flickered with something like satisfaction before settling back into concern. Olivia didn't speak. Ethan interpreted her silence as confirmation that he had managed the situation well. He believed he had avoided conflict. He believed he had preserved dignity his own. What he didn't realize was that Olivia's silence was no longer about restraint. It was about record. She wasn't waiting for him to come back. She wasn't hoping he would reconsider. She was allowing the moment to exist exactly as it was documented by memory, by witnesses, by institutional presence. Ethan walked away, convinced the hardest part was over. He didn't know that the systems he trusted, legal, medical, financial, had already begun to register his absence. He didn't know that Olivia's stillness was not surrender, but sequence. And he didn't know that by choosing Madeline in that hallway, he had placed himself on the wrong side of a process that did not care about intention, only evidence. The ultrasound appointment had been scheduled 3 weeks in advance. Olivia remembered that clearly, because she had written it down twice, once in her notebook, once on the shared calendar Ethan rarely checked anymore. The appointment wasn't labeled dramatically. No exclamation marks. No reminders framed as emotional appeals. Just a time, a location, and a note-detailed scan. Her obstetrician had explained it clinically. Nothing alarming, but thoroughness mattered. Olivia appreciated that. She preferred procedures that acknowledged uncertainty without indulging it. She agreed to the scan, confirmed availability, and moved on. Ethan nodded when she told him. He said, "I'll be there." Not enthusiastically, not dismissively, just neutrally, as if presence were a default setting rather than a choice. In the days that followed, Olivia noticed he didn't mention it again. She did not remind him. The week before the appointment, she received a call from the clinic to confirm attendance. She answered, professionally verified her information, and confirmed she would arrive early. When the receptionist asked if her partner would be joining her, Olivia paused for half a second, long enough to acknowledge the question, then said, "I'll be there on time." The receptionist accepted that answer without pressing. At home, the atmosphere remained orderly. Meals were eaten at predictable hours. Conversations stayed functional. Ethan talked about work. Olivia listened. She talked about logistics. Ethan responded when necessary. There were no arguments to point to, no raised voices to recount later. The marriage appeared intact to anyone observing from a distance. But proximity did not equal alignment. 2 nights before the ultrasound, Ethan came home later than usual. He said he'd been delayed by meetings. Olivia noted the phrasing. Not a meetings, plural, non-specific. She didn't ask for clarification. She served dinner. She cleaned up afterward. That night, she organized documents at the dining table. Insurance papers, appointment summaries. The folder labeled medical had grown thicker over the months. She sorted by date, clipped related pages together, and slid everything back into place. She did not look at the folder labeled legal. That one stayed in her bag. The morning of the appointment arrived without ceremony. Olivia woke before her alarm, as she often did. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were comfortable but structured. She checked her reflection, not for appearance, but for steadiness. She drank water, reviewed her notes, and confirmed the route to the hospital. Ethan was still asleep when she left the bedroom. In the kitchen, she placed her notebook beside her keys. She opened to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Beneath it, she wrote the appointment time. She left the rest of the page blank. Ethan emerged while she was putting on her coat. "Oh," he said, as if surprised. "That's today, yes," Olivia replied. He hesitated, rubbing his face. "I might be late." Something came up. She waited, not expectantly, procedurally. "What time is your appointment again?" he asked. She told him. He nodded. "I'll try." Olivia recognized the phrase for what it was, an exit ramp. She acknowledged it with a nod of her own. No commentary, no appeal. At the door, she paused briefly. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, where another version of her might have turned back. Might have asked him to come. Might have insisted on importance. That version didn't exist anymore. She drove to the hospital alone. The parking structure was full, forcing her to park on a higher level than usual. She walked down the concrete ramp, slowly feeling the familiar pressure of the pregnancy shift as she moved. The hospital doors opened automatically, releasing the neutral scent of disinfectant and recycled air. Inside, the lobby buzzed with restrained activity. Volunteers directed visitors. A security guard nodded as she passed. Olivia checked in at the kiosk, printed her badge, and followed the signs to imaging. She arrived 10 minutes early. The waiting area outside the ultrasound rooms was more crowded than she remembered. Families occupied clusters of chairs. Conversations overlapped quietly. Phones vibrated. A television mounted on the wall played a muted daytime program. Olivia took a seat near the end of the row, placed her bag at her feet, and opened her notebook. She didn't write immediately. She observed. She noticed a couple arguing in whispers near the vending machines. A woman across from her clutched a folder labeled prenatal records. A man paced back and forth, checking his watch. These details registered without emotional attachment. She had become skilled at that. She checked her phone. No messages from Ethan. At exactly 2 minutes before her appointment time, she looked up and noticed the shift. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden silence, no gasps. Just a subtle reorientation of attention, like the room responding to a change in temperature. Heads turned. A few conversations paused. That was when she saw Ethan. He stood near the reception desk, angled slightly toward another woman, Madeline Brooks. Olivia recognized her immediately, though she had never been formally introduced. Recognition didn't come from familiarity, it came from pattern. Madeline's posture was confident, her presence deliberate. She stood close enough to Ethan to suggest entitlement, not proximity by accident. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, fingers curved as if they had been there before. Ethan didn't look around. He didn't scan the room. He didn't search for Olivia. He behaved like someone who assumed the space belonged to him. Olivia felt something settle in her chest, not pain, not shock, but confirmation. The kind that closed questions rather than opened them. She remained seated. When Ethan finally noticed her, it was because Madeline did. Olivia saw the flicker of awareness cross Madeline's face first. Then Madeline shifted slightly, tightening her hold on Ethan's arm. Only then did Ethan follow her gaze. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, Ethan looked startled, not remorseful, exposed. He hadn't expected the convergence. He hadn't prepared for the overlap of narratives. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Olivia didn't react. She didn't stand. She didn't wave. She didn't adjust her expression to make him more comfortable. She simply held his gaze long enough for him to understand that she had seen everything she needed to see. Then she looked away. The receptionist called her name, but moments later. Olivia Allen. Olivia stood, gathered her bag, and walked toward the desk. Behind her, Ethan shifted. Madeline leaned in, murmured something. Olivia didn't turn around to hear it. She didn't need to. When the nurse asked who would be joining the patient, the answer came from Ethan's direction before Olivia could speak. "I won't be going in," he said. His voice was calm, practiced. He gestured toward Madeline, not overtly, but clearly. "I'm needed elsewhere." The nurse glanced between them. The pause was brief, but it existed. Olivia nodded once. The nurse checked the chart, then motioned for Olivia to follow her. As Olivia walked down the hallway toward the ultrasound room, she heard footsteps behind her, then stop. She didn't look back. Inside the room, the lights were dimmer. The equipment hummed softly. The door closed behind her with a gentle click. Outside, in the waiting area, Ethan remained standing beside Madeline, convinced he had just navigated an uncomfortable situation with restraint. Olivia lay back on the exam table, folded her hands over her stomach, and exhaled slowly. She reached into her bag, took out her notebook, and wrote the time. The waiting room did not quiet when Olivia left it. Conversations resumed. A child laughed somewhere near the vending machines. A television commercial switched to another. Life, indifferent and efficient, continued to move forward. But something had shifted. Ethan felt it before he understood it. The space around him felt suddenly exposed, as if the room had registered his decision in a way he had not intended. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his posture, and glanced toward Madeline, searching her face for reassurance. She smiled faintly. "It's fine," she said softly. "You handled it well." He nodded, absorbing the approval like confirmation of his own judgment. He told himself that Olivia had been composed, that no scene had been made, that nothing irreversible had occurred. He told himself that public spaces exaggerated tension, that things would look different later. Madeline guided him toward a pair of chairs near the wall. She sat close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. The contact was subtle, familiar. Ethan did not move away. From that position, the waiting room was visible in fragments. People entered and exited. Names were called. Doors opened and closed. The ultrasound suite became a rhythm, patience in, patience out, moments of anticipation, dissolving into routine. Ethan checked his phone. No messages from Olivia. He felt a flicker of irritation at the absence, not because he wanted reassurance, but because he expected it. He had come to rely on Olivia's predictability, even in her silence. The fact that she had not reached out unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Madeline noticed. "She'll be okay," she said, her tone light but certain. "You know how she is." Ethan nodded again. He liked the way Madeline spoke about Olivia, not unkindly, but dismissively, as if Olivia were a known quantity already accounted for. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Madeline scrolled through her phone. Ethan watched people pass occasionally, checking the door to the ultrasound hallway. He told himself he would go in if something urgent happened. Inside the ultrasound room, Olivia lay still as the technician prepared the equipment. Dr. Hannah Pierce moved with practiced efficiency, explaining each step in a calm, neutral voice. Olivia listened, nodded when appropriate, and answered questions concisely. When the technician asked if anyone else would be joining her, Olivia said no. The word carried no weight. It did not require explanation. Back in the waiting room, time stretched. Madeline grew restless. She shifted in her seat, crossed and uncrossed her legs, checked her phone again. "How long do these things usually take?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "Depends." He didn't know. He had never stayed long enough to find out. Madeline leaned closer. "We could grab coffee," she suggested. "Just for a few minutes." Ethan hesitated. He glanced toward the hallway again. The doors remained closed. "It's fine," Madeline added quickly. "If they need you, they'll call." The logic appealed to him. He stood, and together they walked toward the cafe down the hall. As they passed the reception desk, the nurse looked up briefly. Her gaze lingered on Ethan, then shifted away. The look was professional, but it carried a trace of assessment. Ethan felt it and dismissed it. He ordered coffee. Madeline chatted about work, about plans, about how draining hospitals were. Ethan responded automatically, his attention divided. He kept checking the time, calculating how long Olivia had been inside. He told himself that absence did not equal abandonment. When they returned to the waiting room, the atmosphere felt subtly different. A couple who had been seated earlier was gone. New patients had arrived. The rhythm continued. Then the door to the ultrasound hallway opened. A nurse stepped out, clipboard in hand. She scanned the room, her eyes moving deliberately from face to face. "Olivia Allen," she called. Ethan stood instinctively. Madeline's hand tightened on his arm. The nurse's gaze landed on Ethan. For a brief moment, her expression suggested expectation. Then she noticed Madeline. The shift was almost imperceptible, but it was there. The nurse adjusted her grip on the clipboard. "Yes," Ethan said. The nurse nodded. "The doctor will be with her shortly. She asked that you be informed." Informed of what Madeline asked too quickly. The nurse's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Ethan. "The appointment is proceeding. If there are any questions, the doctor will address them directly with the patient." With that, she turned and disappeared back down the hallway. Ethan remained standing, uncertain. He hadn't expected communication to bypass him so cleanly. He felt suddenly peripheral, like someone waiting for news he was no longer entitled to receive. Madeline released his arm. "That was strange," she said, her tone edged with irritation. "Why wouldn't they tell you?" Ethan didn't answer. He sat back down, the coffee untouched. He told himself it was standard procedure. Patient privacy, protocol. He had heard those explanations before. Still, the sense of exclusion lingered. Inside the ultrasound room, Olivia listened as Dr. Pierce reviewed measurements and observations. The language was technical precise. Olivia appreciated that. She asked questions when necessary, clarifying details without emotion. At one point, Dr. Pierce paused. "There's something we need to document," she said. Olivia nodded. "Of course." Dr. Pierce glanced at the chart. "Your file indicates a trust designation for the children. Is that still accurate?" Olivia met her eyes. "Yes." The doctor nodded, making a note. She did not comment further. The information existed in the chart. It did not require discussion. Back in the waiting room, Ethan shifted again. He felt the weight of time pressing differently now, not as delay, but as distance. He checked his phone once more. Still nothing. Madeline leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You don't look happy," she observed. Ethan exhaled. "I just want this to be over." Madeline smiled thinly. "It will be." What she didn't say, what she didn't yet know, was that the process unfolding behind those closed doors was not moving toward resolution in the way she expected. The ultrasound room door opened again. This time, Dr. Pierce stepped out. She scanned the waiting room with the same deliberate care as the nurse before her. Her eyes landed on Ethan. She recognized him not as a presence, but as an absence. "Mr. Allen?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, standing once more. Dr. Pierce's expression was professional, composed. "Your wife has requested that all further communication be conducted through her legal representative. Any questions you have can be directed accordingly." Ethan blinked. Legal representative Dr. Pierce nodded. "That's correct." She did not elaborate. She turned and walked away. Madeline stared at him. What does that mean? Ethan didn't answer. For the first time that day, he felt something he couldn't immediately rationalize. A door had closed, and he hadn't even realized it was open. Ethan remained standing long after Dr. Pierce disappeared down the hallway. The waiting room seemed to have contracted around him. Conversations resumed, but their edges felt sharper now, as if sound carried differently when one was no longer centered within it. He sat slowly, aware of Madeline watching him, measuring his reaction. "Legal representative," she repeated. Why would she need one for an ultrasound? Ethan shook his head. "I don't know." That answer irritated her. Madeline had grown accustomed to clarity, especially from Ethan. She liked situations where she could anticipate outcomes, where influence translated into control. This development unsettled her, because it introduced a variable she had not accounted for. "You should go talk to her," Madeline said. "This is ridiculous." Ethan glanced toward the hallway again. The doors remained closed. The space beyond them was no longer accessible in the way it had been earlier. The nurse's words echoed in his mind. "Any questions you have can be directed accordingly." Accordingly to whom? He stood again, this time with intent, and walked toward the reception desk. The receptionist looked up, her expression neutral. "I'd like to speak with my wife," he said. The receptionist checked the screen in front of her. "Mrs. Allen is currently with the physician. I'll wait." She nodded. "You may take a seat. If she requests you, we'll let you know." The phrasing mattered. "If she requests you." Ethan returned to his chair. Madeline followed, visibly displeased. "This is absurd," she muttered. "You're her husband." Ethan didn't respond. The word husband felt suddenly provisional, as if its authority depended on circumstances he no longer controlled. Inside the ultrasound room, Olivia sat upright now, the scan completed. Dr. Pierce reviewed notes while a nurse cleaned the equipment. The atmosphere was calm, procedural. There was no sense of urgency, only sequence. "You handled that very well," Dr. Pierce said, not as praise, but as observation. Olivia nodded. "Thank you." "There are additional steps we'll need to take," the doctor continued. "Mostly documentation. Given the trust designation, our administrative team will coordinate with your legal counsel." "That's fine," Olivia replied. She reached into her bag and removed a card. Dr. Pierce accepted it, glanced at the name Daniel Whitmore, Esquire, and nodded again. We'll be in touch. Olivia stood, adjusted her coat, and gathered her belongings. As she moved toward the door, she paused not because she hesitated, but because she was marking the moment. She took out her notebook and added a final line beneath the earlier timestamp. Doctor notified. Legal protocol initiated. Then she closed the notebook and placed it back in her bag. When Olivia stepped into the hallway, she did not look toward the waiting room immediately. She walked at a steady pace, following the nurse toward the exit. Her posture was composed, her expression unreadable. Ethan saw her before she saw him. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Madeline stood too, a half step behind him. Together they formed a small obstruction in the pathway, unintentional but symbolic. Olivia stopped a few feet away. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence drew attention. A nurse slowed her walk. A man across the room glanced up from his phone. The public nature of the space sharpened every detail. Ethan broke first. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice was controlled, but there was an edge now, uncertainty disguised as authority. "Why are lawyers involved?" Olivia met his gaze. She did not raise her voice. She did not step closer. "All communication will go through counsel," she said. The words were simple, final. Madeline scoffed. "This is dramatic," she said. "It's an ultrasound, not a courtroom." Olivia shifted her attention to Madeline for the first time. Her look was not hostile. It was precise. "This doesn't concern you," Olivia said. Madeline stiffened. "Excuse me." Olivia turned back to Ethan. "You made your choice earlier," she continued. "I'm respecting it." Ethan frowned. "That's not fair." Olivia considered him for a moment. Then she nodded once, as if acknowledging the statement rather than agreeing with it. "Fairness isn't the standard here," she said. "Procedure is." She stepped past them and continued toward the exit. Ethan watched her go, the distance between them expanding with each step. He felt the instinct to follow, to call after her, to demand explanation, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the witnesses. Perhaps it was the growing sense that he was no longer the primary decision-maker in this narrative. Madeline grabbed his arm. "You're not just going to let her do this," she said, her voice low and urgent. Ethan didn't pull away, but he didn't reassure her either. His attention remained fixed on the doors through which Olivia had just passed. In the lobby, Olivia paused briefly to collect herself. She did not cry. She did not rush. She checked her phone, still no messages from Ethan, and placed it back into her bag. She exited the hospital into the daylight, the automatic doors sliding shut behind her. Inside, Ethan sat back down slowly. "What did the doctor say?" Madeline asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. Not to me." Madeline's expression hardened. "This is getting out of hand." Ethan didn't respond. He replayed the morning in his mind, the appointment, the hallway, the choice. He had believed that standing with Madeline had been a temporary adjustment, a manageable deviation. He had not anticipated consequences that extended beyond emotion. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. A notification appeared moments later, not a message, but an email alert. The sender was Unfamiliar Whitmore Legal Group. Ethan stared at the screen without opening it. Madeline noticed. "What is that?" He hesitated, then turned the phone slightly so she could see. Her eyes narrowed. "Why is her lawyer emailing you?" Ethan swallowed. He didn't know how to answer that. In another part of the city, Olivia sat in her car, hands resting on the steering wheel. She took a deep breath, then another. The world felt quieter here contained. She started the engine and drove away from the hospital. She did not look back. Inside the ultrasound room, time moved differently. The hum of the machine blended with the soft rhythm of the monitor, creating a steady background that felt insulated from the rest of the hospital. The lights were dimmed, the screen angled toward Dr. Hannah Pierce. Olivia lay back on the exam table, hands folded loosely over her abdomen, her breathing even. Dr. Pierce worked with quiet precision. She narrated the procedure as she always did, not to reassure but to inform. measurements, positions, gestational markers. Olivia listened, absorbing the information without interruption. Everything looks consistent so far, Dr. Pierce said, adjusting the transducer slightly. Heart rate is strong. The sound filled the room, rapid, unmistakable. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, not from emotion, but from focus. She noted the cadence, the steadiness. One heartbeat, clear, reliable. Dr. Pierce paused. It was subtle, but Olivia noticed. She had learned to recognize pauses that weren't transitional. "Give me a moment," Dr. Pierce said. She adjusted the angle again, her expression unchanged. The screen flickered as the image shifted. Olivia opened her eyes and watched the reflection of the monitor in the doctor's glasses. Then the sound came again. A second rhythm, distinct, separate. Dr. Pierce did not speak immediately. She confirmed measurements, adjusted settings, and cross-checked angles with a kind of thoroughness that left no room for error. Only when she was certain did she straighten slightly. "Olivia," she said, her voice calm, grounded, "you're carrying twins." The words settled into the room without drama. Twins. Olivia did not gasp. She did not laugh or cry. Her response was physical before it was emotional, a deeper inhale, a longer exhale. Her fingers tightened once, then relaxed. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Yes," Dr. Pierce replied. 2 heartbeats, 2 separate sacs. Everything indicates a twin pregnancy. Olivia nodded. She asked the next logical questions, gestational age risk factors, monitoring adjustments. Her voice remained steady. The questions came from preparation, not shock. Dr. Pierce answered each one carefully. She explained next steps, additional monitoring changes to the care plan. The conversation stayed clinical, respectful. There was no assumption that joy required volume. As the scan continued, the nurse entered quietly to document findings. She glanced at the screen, then at Olivia, her expression softening before returning to professionalism. "Do you have support at home?" the nurse asked gently. Olivia met her eyes. Yes, it was not a lie. Support did not have to come from the person who shared her last name. Dr. Pierce completed the scan and wiped the gel from Olivia's abdomen. She printed images, labeling each carefully. She did not assume who would receive them. "I'll step out and have the nurse bring you information on twin prenatal care," she said. "We'll also need to review your file." Olivia nodded again. When the door closed behind the doctor, the room fell quiet. Olivia sat up slowly, steadying herself. She took the images and placed them in her bag without looking at them yet. There would be time. She reached for her notebook. She wrote one line. 2 heartbeats confirmed. Her hand did not shake. A few minutes later, Dr. Pierce returned holding a tablet. She reviewed the screen, then looked at Olivia. "There's an additional note in your file," she said, "regarding financial and legal documentation for the children." Olivia's gaze remained steady. "Yes." Dr. Pierce tilted the tablet slightly. "It indicates an act of trust with designated beneficiaries pending birth." "That's correct," Olivia said. The doctor nodded. "We don't see this often, but it's clearly documented. The trust administrator has already coordinated with the hospital." She paused, then added, "Given the size of the trust, we're required to follow specific protocols." Olivia listened without reaction. Dr. Pierce continued. "Once the twins are born, the trust becomes fully operative. Until then, any medical decisions involving them will follow the legal framework outlined here." She hesitated, not uncertain, but considerate. "Do you have any questions?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "No," she said. "Everything is in order." Dr. Pierce smiled faintly. "It is." Outside the room, Ethan waited. He had not been invited in. He had not been updated. The absence gnawed at him, now sharper than before. He paced briefly, then stopped when Madeline shot him a look. "You're making this worse," she whispered. Ethan exhaled, forced himself to sit. He tried to rationalize the situation. He told himself Olivia was overreacting. He told himself this was temporary leverage. He told himself that once emotions cooled, things would return to balance. What he didn't account for was that balance had already shifted. Inside the ultrasound room, Dr. Pierce handed Olivia a folder. "This contains your updated care plan and information on twin pregnancies," she said. "It also includes contact information for our administrative liaison." Olivia accepted it. "Thank you." As Dr. Pierce turned to leave, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said, choosing her words carefully, "you handled today with clarity." Olivia nodded. "That matters." "Yes," Dr. Pierce agreed. "It does." When Olivia stepped back into the hallway, the waiting room was still full. Ethan stood when he saw her. Madeline did too, positioning herself instinctively at his side. Olivia saw them both. She saw Ethan's expectation confusion edged with entitlement. She saw Madeline's calculation, the quick assessment of posture tone advantage. Olivia did not slow. Ethan spoke her name, but she did not stop. Not because she couldn't hear him, but because she had already decided not to engage. As she passed, she felt the weight of the images in her bag, the documentation, the knowledge now fully confirmed. 2 heartbeats, 2 futures, 2 witnesses that would one day ask questions. She reached the end of the hallway and paused just long enough to take out her notebook one last time. She added a second line beneath the first. "Procedure completed without spousal presence." Then she closed the notebook. Behind her, Ethan stood frozen, watching the space she had occupied empty out. For the first time, the truth began to surface, not in accusation, not in anger, but in structure. The hospital had documented everything. The doctors had noted everything. The systems he trusted had observed his absence without judgment. And inside Olivia, something settled into place. Not revenge, not triumph, preparation. The administrative wing of the hospital was quieter than the imaging floor. Olivia had learned that silence took different forms depending on where it lived. In hallways where people waited, silence was tense provisional. Here, behind doors labeled with departments and titles, silence was procedural. It existed because work was being done. A nurse guided Olivia into a small office adjacent to patient services. The room was modest: 2 chairs, a desk, a framed poster explaining patient rights. The nurse excused herself, saying someone would be with her shortly. Olivia sat down and placed her bag on the floor beside her feet. She did not open it. She didn't need to. She waited. Within minutes, a woman entered the room carrying a tablet and a thin folder. She introduced herself as Karen Mills, an administrative liaison for special cases. Her demeanor was polite, precise, and carefully neutral. "Mrs. Allen," Karen said, taking a seat across from her. "Thank you for waiting. I just need to confirm a few items in your file." Olivia nodded. Karen tapped the tablet. "Your medical information is in order. The reason for this meeting is the trust designation attached to your pregnancy." She paused, not for effect, but to ensure clarity. Specifically, the documentation regarding the Reed family trust. Olivia met her gaze. "Yes." Karen glanced down at the screen again. "The trust was activated last year with provisions updated 3 months ago. It designates your unborn children as primary beneficiaries." "That's correct." Karen hesitated briefly, then continued. "The value listed here is $900 million. She said the number evenly without emphasis. Numbers like that didn't gain power from tone. They carried their own gravity. Olivia didn't react. Karen watched her carefully, not suspiciously, but with professional curiosity. "Most patients aren't aware of how early these designations can be implemented," she said. "In your case, everything has already been coordinated." "Yes," Olivia replied. "That was intentional." Karen nodded. "There's one additional detail we need to clarify." She slid the folder across the desk. "This trust includes specific conditions regarding guardianship decision-making authority and access to information," she explained. "Until the children are born, these conditions apply provisionally." Olivia opened the folder and scanned the contents. She had read them before. She knew the language, the structure, the implications. Karen continued. The trust specifies that all medical and financial decisions related to the children are to be made exclusively by you or by your appointed legal representative. She paused. This includes decisions about who receives information. Olivia looked up. Yes. Karen inhaled slowly. Your husband was present in the waiting area today. It was not a question. Yes, Olivia said. Karen's expression remained neutral. However, your file indicates that he is not authorized to receive medical or administrative updates without your explicit consent. That's correct. Karen nodded again. We wanted to confirm that remains your preference. Olivia did not hesitate. It does. Karen made a note on the tablet. Then that's how we'll proceed. The confirmation did not feel like a victory. It felt like alignment. The system was behaving as designed. Karen closed the folder. You should know, she said, that this designation will remain in place unless you choose to amend it. No one else can override it. Olivia considered that for a moment. She thought of Ethan standing in the waiting room, of his expectation that proximity still granted authority, of Madeline's assumption that presence equaled influence. I understand, Olivia said. Karen offered a small professional smile. Very well. If there's anything you need, we'll coordinate through your attorney. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Allen. You too, Olivia replied. When Karen left the room, Olivia remained seated for a few seconds longer. She did not rush. She allowed the information to settle, not because it was new, but because it had now been acknowledged by another institution. That mattered. She gathered her things and walked back toward the exit. The hospital corridors felt different now. Not hostile, not comforting, but structured. Everything had a place, including absence. As she passed the waiting room again, she did not look for Ethan. She didn't need to. Outside, the daylight was bright and unfiltered. Olivia paused near the entrance, adjusting the strap of her bag. She took out her phone and checked the time. A notification blinked on the screen, an email from Daniel Whitmore. She did not open it. She knew what it would say. Instead, she walked to her car and sat behind the wheel. She placed both hands on the steering wheel and exhaled slowly. Her reflection stared back at her from the windshield, steady, composed, unchanged. Only then did she allow herself to think about the trust. Jonathan Reed had been methodical, even in death. He had planned for contingencies Olivia hadn't wanted to consider at the time. When he had explained the trust, he had framed it as protection, not wealth. This isn't about money, he had said. It's about leverage, about making sure no one can corner you. She had understood that then. She understood it more clearly now. Ethan did not know about the trust. He had never asked. He had assumed financial matters were shared by default, that marriage granted access without inquiry. Olivia had not corrected that assumption. She had simply structured her affairs accordingly. Back inside the hospital, Ethan checked his phone again. The email notification still sat unopened. He hesitated, then finally tapped it. The message was brief, formal. It informed him that all future communication regarding medical, financial, and custodial matters would be conducted through counsel. It included contact information. It included no explanation. Ethan felt a tightening in his chest, not fear exactly, but disorientation. The rules he thought he understood no longer applied. Madeline leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. That's it? She asked. No explanation. Ethan shook his head. She scoffed. She's bluffing. But Ethan wasn't so sure. The hospital had not treated it like a bluff. The staff hadn't hesitated. The doctor hadn't deferred. The administrative liaison had followed protocol without question. Institutions didn't react to bluffs. They reacted to documentation. As Olivia drove away from the hospital, the city unfolded around her: traffic lights, crosswalks, familiar streets. Life continued as it always had. No one noticed the shift that had occurred within her. She reached a red light and stopped. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text from Ethan. We need to talk. Olivia read it once. She did not respond. She placed the phone face down on the passenger seat and waited for the light to change. When it did, she drove on. The Reed family trust had never been a secret. It had simply never been discussed. Jonathan Reed believed in clarity over confession. He had built his fortune the way he lived quietly, methodically, without spectacle. When Olivia was a teenager, he had explained money to her the way other parents explained weather patterns, something powerful, predictable if respected, destructive if ignored. Visibility invites interference, he used to say. Structure creates safety. When Jonathan Reed died, the press coverage was restrained by design. His companies issued statements, markets adjusted, analysts speculated. Olivia attended the funeral without drawing attention, dressed in black, standing slightly apart from the executives and advisors who knew exactly who she was. The trust had been finalized 6 months later. Jonathan had insisted on independent counsel. He had insisted on contingencies. He had insisted that Olivia not be required to disclose anything to anyone. Not spouses, not partners, not even future children until the appropriate time. This isn't about hiding, he had told her. It's about timing. At the time, Olivia had nodded without argument. She had not yet needed to understand the full implication. Now she did. The trust had been activated quietly. Assets transferred into holding structures designed to outlive scrutiny. Boards appointed. Administrators briefed. Everything documented. Nothing announced. The figure $900 million was not meant to impress. It was meant to insulate. It existed to ensure that Olivia, and any children she had, would never need to negotiate safety or autonomy. Jonathan had been explicit about one thing. If you ever feel cornered, he had said, do not explain yourself. Let the framework speak. As Olivia drove through the city, that instruction replayed itself without urgency. She arrived home and parked in the driveway, sitting in the car a moment longer than necessary. The house looked unchanged. Familiar. Neutral. A place that still belonged to her legally and structurally, even if emotionally it had begun to detach. Inside, the quiet felt earned. She set her bag on the dining table and removed the folder from the hospital. She placed it beside the notebook, aligning the edges carefully. She did not open either. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water and sat down. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. Please don't do this like this. Olivia read it without reaction. The phrasing struck her as revealing not because it was emotional, but because it assumed leverage. Please implied request. Don't do this implied control. Like this implied the problem was method, not outcome. She did not respond. Minutes passed. The house remained still. At the hospital, Ethan paced the length of the waiting room, ignoring Madeline's attempts to redirect him. She had grown impatient now, her earlier confidence eroding. This is ridiculous, she said again. You're letting her control the narrative. Ethan stopped and looked at her. For the first time, his irritation was not abstract. She's not doing anything, he said. She's not even talking. Madeline crossed her arms. Exactly. That's manipulation. Ethan didn't answer. He replayed the events in sequence, the appointment, the hallway, the nurse, the doctor, the email. None of it felt theatrical. None of it felt improvised. It felt planned. He thought back over the months leading up to this day. Olivia's silence, her routines, her notebooks. He had dismissed them as passivity. He wondered now if that had been a mistake. He checked his phone again. Another email had arrived, this one from the same address. The subject line read, Confirmation of representation. Ethan opened it. The message was brief, but its implications were expansive. It confirmed that Daniel Whitmore represented Olivia Allen in all matters related to medical decisions, asset protection, and future custodial arrangements. It advised that any attempts to bypass representation would be documented. Ethan swallowed. Madeline leaned in. What is it? He hesitated, then showed her the screen. Her expression shifted not to fear, but to calculation. That doesn't mean anything, she said quickly. Anyone can hire a lawyer. Ethan shook his head slowly. Hospitals don't adjust protocol for anyone. Madeline opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She glanced around the waiting room, suddenly aware of how visible they were. She lowered her voice. "You didn't tell me she came from money," she said. "I didn't know," Ethan replied. The words sounded hollow even to him. Back at home, Olivia opened her laptop. She logged into her email and scrolled past unread messages until she reached one marked with a discreet flag. She opened it. Daniel Whitmore's message was precise as always. "Olivia, the hospital has confirmed activation of provisional trust protocols. Documentation is complete. At your discretion, we can initiate the next phase." Olivia read the message once. She did not reply immediately. She closed the laptop and stood moving slowly through the house. She paused in the nursery space she had been organizing. The room was unfinished, bare walls, a single chair boxes stacked neatly in the corner. 2 children. The reality of it pressed closer now, not emotionally overwhelming, but logistically significant. 2 lives with legal standing. 2 futures already protected by structures Ethan did not know existed. She placed a hand on her abdomen, feeling the subtle shift of movement beneath her palm. "Okay," she murmured, not as reassurance, but as acknowledgement. She returned to the dining table and opened her notebook. On a new page, she wrote, "Trust confirmation acknowledged. Next phase pending." She closed the notebook. At the hospital, Ethan finally left the waiting room. Madeline followed her heels, clicking sharply against the floor. In the parking structure, the air felt stale. Ethan leaned against his car, rubbing his temples. "This isn't how this was supposed to go," he said. Madeline frowned. "What did you expect I expected?" He trailed off. He didn't know how to finish the sentence. He had expected compliance, continuity, control. Instead, he was confronting systems that did not respond to emotion or proximity, systems that responded only to documentation and authority. That night, Olivia slept deeply, not because she felt safe. She had always felt safe, but because something unresolved had finally been placed where it belonged. Outside her control. The trust would move forward when she allowed it. The legal process would unfold at its own pace. Ethan's reaction no longer mattered in the way it once had. The power shift had already occurred, quietly and irrevocably. The email sat unopened for most of the evening. Olivia knew its contents without reading them. Daniel Whitmore did not write emotionally. He wrote in steps, options, sequences, consequences. His messages were never urgent unless urgency was required, and this one had been marked simply next phase. She let it wait. Dinner was simple. Something light eaten slowly at the table. Olivia cleaned up afterward, rinsing dishes with care, aligning them in the rack the way she always had. The routine grounded her. It reminded her that life continued even as structures shifted beneath it. When she finally opened the email, it was after she had showered and changed into comfortable clothes. She sat at the dining table again, laptop open, notebook beside it. Daniel's message was exactly as she expected. He confirmed receipt of hospital documentation. He outlined the legal posture now in place. Medical authority secured information flow, restricted provisional custodial rights, acknowledged pending birth. He noted that Ethan had been formally notified and that any attempts to circumvent counsel would be recorded. Then came the choice. If you wish the email read, we can proceed in one of 2 ways. Option A maintains current protections without escalation. Option B initiates formal separation of financial and custodial interests. Daniel did not recommend either. He never did. His role was to present clarity, not preference. Olivia read the email twice. Then she closed the laptop without responding. She knew why she was hesitating. Escalation was not about anger. It was about timing. And timing required information. She needed one more thing, not from documents, not from lawyers, but from Ethan himself. Not an explanation, a confirmation. She wanted to know whether the choice he had made in the hospital hallway was situational or structural. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Please, we need to talk tonight." Olivia stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed a reply. Tomorrow, through counsel. She sent it and placed the phone face down. The response came almost immediately. That's unnecessary. Olivia did not reply. Unnecessary was not the standard. At Ethan's apartment, because he had not returned home that night, the air felt tense. Madeline paced while he sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. She can't do this, Madeline said. You're her husband. Ethan didn't look up. That doesn't seem to matter. Madeline stopped pacing. You're just letting her shut you out. I'm not letting her do anything, Ethan replied. I don't know how to stop it. The admission surprised them both. Madeline sat down, her tone softening. Then we fight it. Ethan shook his head. With what? She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had assumed access would translate into leverage. She had assumed proximity would grant authority. The hospital had disproved that assumption. She's bluffing, Madeline said again, but the words lacked conviction. Ethan checked his phone. No new messages, no calls. For the first time, he wondered what Olivia had been doing all those quiet months. He thought of her notebooks, her routines, her refusal to argue. He had mistaken calm for compliance. The next morning, Olivia woke early. She dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors. She ate breakfast, standing at the counter, then gathered her bag. Before leaving the house, she paused by the front door and looked around, not sentimentally, but inventorying. Everything was still hers. Legally, practically, structurally. At her desk, downtown, Daniel Whitmore reviewed files as Olivia entered his office. He stood to greet her as always and gestured for her to sit. You don't need to explain, he said before she could speak. I've reviewed the communications. Olivia nodded. I haven't responded yet. That's fine, Daniel replied. Silence is often the cleanest position. He slid a document across the desk. This is option A in writing. Maintenance of current protections, no escalation, no public filings. Olivia skimmed it. Daniel continued option B initiates formal separation. It does not require confrontation. It simply moves authority where it already belongs. What changes if I wait? Olivia asked. Nothing critical, Daniel said. But waiting allows the other party to believe there is still room to negotiate. Olivia considered that. Is there? Daniel met her gaze. Only if you want there to be. She thought of the hospital hallway, of Ethan's posture, of Madeline's hand on his arm, of the nurse's pause. No, Olivia said. There isn't. Daniel nodded and pulled out a second document. Then this is the next step. We'll send it electronically. It will feel abrupt. That's unavoidable. I understand, Olivia said. Daniel paused. One more thing. He tapped the document lightly. Once this is sent, your husband may attempt to contact you directly. He may also attempt to reframe events. Olivia did not react. Do you want me to block all direct communication? Daniel asked. Olivia shook her head. No, document it. Daniel's expression shifted not to approval, but to recognition. Very well. By noon, the email had been sent. Ethan received it while sitting in his car outside his office. The subject line was unremarkable. Notice of representation and asset segregation. He opened it. The language was formal, precise, and devastating in its restraint. It outlined the immediate separation of financial interests, the suspension of joint account access pending review, and the initiation of custodial framework discussions to be handled exclusively through counsel. There was no accusation, no moral framing, just procedure. Ethan felt his breath shorten. He read the email again, searching for emotion. There was none. Madeline called moments later. Did she respond? Yes, Ethan said. Well, she escalated. Madeline exhaled sharply. See, I told you. She's trying to scare you. Ethan didn't answer. He stared at the line item detailing account freezes. He thought of the trust, $900 million, documented, protected. He realized that Olivia had never needed his cooperation. She's not trying to scare me, he said quietly. She's moving on. Madeline frowned. You can't just let her. I already did, Ethan replied. He hung up before she could finish. That afternoon, Olivia received confirmation from Daniel. Accounts adjusted. Notices sent. Timelines established. She read the message once and closed it. There was no sense of triumph. No release. Only alignment. She placed her hand on her abdomen again, feeling the subtle movement beneath her skin. Okay, she said softly. This time the word carried finality. Ethan told himself he still had time. That was the thought he returned to throughout the afternoon, clinging to it as emails filtered in and notifications stacked up. Time, he believed, could smooth this over. Time could reset tone. Time could turn procedure back into conversation. He had not yet understood that procedure was the conversation now. At his office, he closed the door and sat at his desk, staring at the notice again. The language was unmistakable. Asset segregation, custodial framework, exclusive representation. Each phrase removed another assumption he had lived under without questioning. He picked up his phone and typed Olivia's name. Then he deleted it. He typed again. We can talk without lawyers. He stared at the message, then erased it. The notice had been explicit. Direct communication would be documented. Anything he said now would exist in a record that did not belong to him. For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of being observed, not watched, but recorded. He tried to focus on work. Meetings blurred together. He nodded at the right moment, spoke when expected, but his attention fractured. Numbers that had once felt manageable now looked uncertain. He opened a banking app and found access restricted. A banner informed him politely that changes were pending review. He closed the app and leaned back in his chair. Across town, Olivia moved through her day with deliberate normalcy. She attended her own appointments. She reviewed documents. She took calls that had nothing to do with Ethan. The separation had not disrupted her rhythm. If anything, it had clarified it. That afternoon, Daniel Whitmore called her briefly. The initial response was received, he said. No objections filed yet. Thank you, Olivia replied. There may be attempts to reframe, Daniel added. That's common at this stage. I'm aware, Olivia said. After the call, Olivia sat quietly for a moment. She thought of Ethan, not as he was now, but as he had been when the marriage still held shape. She did not feel nostalgia. She felt distance, the kind that came from seeing something clearly for the first time. Ethan left his office early. He drove aimlessly at first, then found himself pulling into the parking lot of the cafe Madeline liked. He sat in the car for a few seconds, then went inside. Madeline looked up sharply when she saw him. Well, she asked. He sat down across from her. She moved everything to lawyers. Madeline scoffed. So what? That doesn't mean she's done. Ethan watched her closely. He noticed how quickly she dismissed what unsettled him. He noticed how little she asked about details. She froze accounts, he said. Separated assets. Madeline's expression tightened. She can't do that without your consent. She can, Ethan replied. She already did. Madeline leaned back, crossing her arms. Then fight it, with what Ethan asked again. Madeline hesitated. With reason. With fairness. Ethan almost laughed. That's not how this works. Madeline stared at him. Since when do you talk like that? Since today, he said. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument they had shared. Madeline broke it first. You didn't tell me she was rich, she said. Ethan met her gaze. I didn't know. Madeline's skepticism was immediate. You're married to her. That doesn't mean I knew everything, Ethan replied. It means I assumed. Madeline shook her head. People don't just have $900 million without signs. Ethan thought of Olivia's quiet routines. Her notebooks, her refusal to perform. He thought of how easily he had mistaken restraint for lack. She didn't live like she needed anything he said. I didn't think to ask. Madeline looked away. So what happens now? Ethan exhaled slowly. Now she decides. Madeline frowned. And what about me? The question hung there unanswered. At home that evening, Olivia reviewed the day's notes and filed them away. She placed new documents into labeled folders, aligning edges, maintaining order. The process was methodical grounding. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from Ethan. "I never meant for it to happen like this." Olivia read the words carefully. She noted what they did not contain. There was no acknowledgement of choice, no recognition of consequence, only regret framed around optics. She did not reply. Instead, she forwarded the message to Daniel and placed her phone back on the table. Across the city, Ethan stared at the lack of response. He felt the familiar urge to justify, to explain context, to rewrite intent. But the structure in place did not reward explanation. It rewarded compliance. Madeline watched him from across the room. "She's ignoring you," she said. "She's documenting," Ethan replied. Madeline's impatience flared. "You're just going to let her erase you?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "I erased myself." The words surprised him as he said them. They felt accurate in a way he had been avoiding. Later that night, Olivia lay in bed, one hand resting over her abdomen. She felt movement, subtle, rhythmic. Two presences asserting themselves in quiet ways. She did not think of Ethan then. She thought of timing, of sequence, of how the next steps would unfold without drama if she allowed them to. The power shift had not come from confrontation. It had come from preparation. And for the first time since the hospital hallway, Olivia felt no need to wait for anything else to be revealed. Everything that mattered was already in motion. The meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. on a Thursday. Daniel Whitmore had chosen the time deliberately, not early enough to feel aggressive, not late enough to invite delay. The conference room was small, neutral, and windowed on one side. Nothing about it suggested conflict. Everything about it suggested process. Olivia arrived 5 minutes early. She wore a tailored coat over a simple dress, her movements unhurried. She placed her bag on the table, removed her notebook, and set it to the side without opening it. Daniel entered moments later, carrying a slim folder and a tablet. He greeted her with a nod and took the seat beside her, not across. "Ethan will be here shortly," he said. His counsel confirmed. Olivia nodded. She did not ask who Ethan had chosen as representation. It did not matter. When the door opened, Ethan entered alone. He looked different than he had at the hospital, not outwardly distressed, but diminished in some way that was difficult to define. He wore the same confident posture, but it no longer aligned with the room. He took the seat across from Olivia without meeting her eyes. A second later, his attorney arrived, a man in his early 40s, competent, cautious. He shook Daniel's hand, then nodded to Olivia politely. Introductions were made. The door closed. Daniel began without preamble. "This meeting concerns procedural clarification," he said evenly. "There will be no negotiation today." Ethan's attorney shifted slightly. Ethan looked up. Daniel continued. "The purpose is to confirm understanding of current legal standing and outline next steps." He slid a document across the table toward Ethan. Ethan hesitated, then took it. He scanned the first page quickly, then more slowly. Olivia watched without expression. The document outlined the custodial framework in neutral language. It referenced medical authority, provisional guardianship, and the trust's controlling interest in decisions related to the unborn children. It cited statutes. It referenced prior communications. It did not accuse. Ethan's jaw tightened. "This is excessive," he said finally. "We're married." Daniel did not respond immediately. He waited until Ethan's attorney glanced at him, then spoke. "Marriage does not supersede trust provisions," Daniel said, "nor does it override medical directives established by the patient." Ethan looked at Olivia then, searching her face for reaction. There was none. "What about joint decision-making?" Ethan asked. "What about parental rights?" Daniel nodded. "Those will be addressed after birth in accordance with the trust and applicable law. Until then, the patient retains exclusive authority." Ethan's attorney cleared his throat. "My client has concerns about exclusion. Daniel met his gaze. Exclusion is not the issue. Documentation is. He tapped the tablet lightly. We have records from the hospital, witness statements, administrative confirmations, all indicating that Mr. Allen declined participation at a critical medical appointment. Ethan shifted. I didn't decline. Daniel raised a hand, not dismissively, but to pause the narrative. Intent is not under discussion. Sequence is. The words settled into the room. Daniel continued. The hospital followed protocol based on the information available at the time. That protocol has now been formalized. Ethan's attorney glanced at his client, then back at Daniel. Are you suggesting this is irreversible? Daniel considered the question. I'm suggesting that reversal requires justification. At present, none has been provided. Ethan leaned forward. This is punishment. Olivia spoke for the first time. No, she said. Her voice was calm, precise. It's boundary. The room went still. Ethan looked at her, surprised, not by the words, but by the tone. There was no anger in it, no plea, just definition. I didn't know, he said. About the trust, about the I didn't ask you to, Olivia replied. And you didn't ask me. Silence returned. Daniel allowed it to sit, then resumed. The trust becomes fully operative upon birth, he said. At that point, financial and custodial arrangements will be formalized. Until then, all interim decisions remain with Miss Allen. Ethan's attorney nodded slowly. We'll need time to review. Of course, Daniel said. That's expected. He slid a second document across the table. This confirms account segregation. It's already in effect. Ethan stared at the page. He recognized account numbers, figures, access points that were no longer available to him. You can't just, he began. Daniel met his gaze. We can, and we have. The meeting ended without raised voices. No one stood abruptly, no one stormed out. Papers were gathered, chairs were pushed back with restraint. Professional farewells were exchanged. Ethan lingered as the attorneys exited, leaving him and Olivia alone for a brief moment. He looked at her, then not accusatory, not angry, just uncertain. I never thought you'd do this, he said quietly. Olivia considered him for a moment. She did not correct the framing. I didn't do anything, she said. I stopped doing something. He frowned. What explaining? She replied. She stood, gathered her bag, and left the room. Ethan remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from him. Outside, Olivia walked down the hallway with steady steps. She did not feel relief. She felt clarity. The meeting had not changed the trajectory, it had confirmed it. Her phone vibrated once as she went to the elevator. A message from Daniel. Proceeding as discussed. She replied with a single word. Yes. The elevator doors closed. Olivia watched her reflection in the mirrored wall. It looked the same as it had that morning. Composed, unmarked. The legal process would continue. Emails would be sent, documents filed, timelines observed. But the most important decision had already been made quietly, without spectacle, in a hospital hallway where Ethan had chosen where to stand. And that choice had been enough. The room where the next meeting took place was smaller than the last. It wasn't a conference room this time, but a private office inside Daniel Whitmore's firm, one designed for documentation rather than discussion. A single table, 4 chairs, a wall-mounted screen, no windows. Olivia arrived alone. She placed her bag beside the chair and took out her notebook, opening it to a page already marked with the date and time. She did not write yet. She waited. Daniel entered with a paralegal who set a laptop on the table and connected it to the screen. Moments later, Ethan arrived, this time accompanied by his attorney. Madeline was not present. That absence mattered. Introductions were minimal. Everyone had already met. There was no pretense of familiarity, no attempt at softening tone. Daniel began by turning on the screen. Today's purpose, he said, is evidentiary confirmation. Ethan stiffened. His attorney leaned forward slightly. Daniel continued. This is not a hearing. There will be no argument. We are documenting facts relevant to custody asset protection and conduct. He nodded to the paralegal who clicked a key. The screen lit up. The first item was an email time-stamped unedited. A confirmation from the hospital noting that Olivia Allen attended a critical ultrasound appointment without spousal presence and that spousal access had been declined by the patient. Daniel read the header aloud, then stopped. "Mr. Allen," he said, "do you dispute this record?" Ethan swallowed. "No." The paralegal clicked again. The next item was a log administrative notes from the hospital's patient services department. It included names, times, and procedural observations. The language was clinical, impersonal. One line stood out. Spouse present in waiting area. Chose not to accompany patient. Noted by staff. Daniel let the line sit on the screen for several seconds. "Do you dispute this record?" he asked again. Ethan shook his head. His attorney said nothing. The next item was an audio clip. Daniel did not introduce it theatrically. He simply said, "This is recorded communication from the hospital hallway captured incidentally by a staff body microphone. It has been cleared for internal review." He nodded to the paralegal. The audio played. It was brief. 30 seconds at most. Footsteps, ambient noise. Then Ethan's voice calm measured. "I won't be going in. I'm needed elsewhere." A pause. Another voice, female, lower. "Madeline, you don't need to explain." The clip ended. The room was silent. Daniel turned to Ethan. "Do you dispute the authenticity of this recording?" Ethan did not answer immediately. His face had gone pale, not from shock but from recognition. Hearing his own voice stripped of context had an effect he had not anticipated. "No," he said finally. Daniel nodded and motioned for the paralegal to stop the display. "The purpose of this," Daniel said, "is not to shame. It is to establish pattern." Ethan's attorney cleared his throat. Pattern of what? Daniel met his gaze. Pattern of decision-making under public observation. He gestured toward Olivia. "Miss Allen has made no claims about intent. She has not alleged malice. She has allowed evidence to speak." Olivia remained still. Daniel continued. "When custodial and financial interests intersect courts, look for consistency, not explanation, not regret." Ethan leaned forward. "I didn't abandon her." Daniel did not respond immediately. Instead, Olivia spoke. "You weren't there," she said. The simplicity of the statement left no room for rebuttal. Daniel nodded once and turned back to the screen. "The final item is financial." The paralegal brought up bank records, summarized, redacted, were appropriate but unmistakable in scope. Trust structures, asset segregation timelines, account freezes executed according to protocol. Daniel spoke as the information displayed. The Reed family trust was activated prior to this incident. That is not in dispute. What is relevant is the alignment between activation timing and subsequent conduct. He looked at Ethan. The trust was designed to protect minors from instability. Ethan's attorney frowned. "Are you implying my client is unstable?" Daniel shook his head. "No. I'm implying that documented absence during critical events is a variable the trust explicitly addresses." He turned to Olivia. "Miss Allen has exercised restraint. She has not requested punitive measures. She has requested structure." Daniel closed the file on the screen. "That concludes the evidentiary portion." The paralegal shut down the laptop and quietly exited the room. No one spoke for a moment. Ethan finally looked at Olivia, not defensively this time, but searching. "You could have told me," he said. Olivia met his gaze. "You didn't ask." The words were not sharp. They were factual. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at the table, his hands folded tightly together. Daniel stood. "There will be follow-up filings. Custodial discussions will proceed post-birth. Until then, the current framework remains." Ethan's attorney nodded. Understood. As they prepared to leave, Ethan hesitated. He looked at Olivia one last time. "I never thought silence could do this," he said. Olivia considered the statement carefully. "Silence doesn't do anything," she replied. "It reveals." She stood and left the room. Outside, the hallway felt brighter than before. Olivia walked without hurry, her steps measured, her breathing steady. She did not feel victorious. She felt finished with explanations, with carrying weight that no longer belonged to her. Behind her, Ethan remained seated, staring at a table that no longer offered him leverage, only evidence. For the first time, he understood that the story had moved forward without him at its center, and it would not circle back. There was no announcement, no message sent to extended family, no carefully worded statement released to friends or colleagues. Olivia did not correct rumors or preempt conversations. She did not ask Daniel to make a point. She asked him to proceed. That distinction mattered. The days following the evidentiary meeting unfolded with quiet regularity. Filings were submitted, timelines confirmed, notifications sent where legally required and nowhere else. The machinery of procedure moved forward without friction because it had been designed to. Olivia continued her routine. She attended medical appointments. She reviewed documents delivered electronically and returned them with brief acknowledgments. She took calls from Daniel when necessary and declined those that weren't. She slept well. She ate carefully. She walked each morning, keeping her pace steady. The pregnancy advanced. The reality of twins became less abstract with each passing day, not in sentiment but in logistics. Additional appointments appeared on her calendar. Adjustments were made. She prepared without ceremony. Ethan attempted contact 3 more times. Each message arrived with a different tone. The first was conciliatory. "I understand why you're upset. I just want to talk." Olivia forwarded it to Daniel. The second was defensive. "You're making this look worse than it was." She forwarded that too. The third was indignant. "You can't just cut me out of my own children's lives." Daniel acknowledged receipt and advised no response. Olivia agreed. She did not feel satisfaction in the silence. She felt alignment. The words Ethan used now were not new. They were simply louder versions of what had existed before. She had already listened long enough. Madeline, for her part, was conspicuously absent. Her absence was not dramatic. It simply became noticeable over time. Ethan stopped mentioning her. Her name did not appear in messages or filings. There were no accusations leveled in her direction, no attempts to involve her formally. She had no standing. That too mattered. When Daniel raised the subject during a routine check-in, Olivia responded with clarity. "I don't want her referenced," she said. "Not because of emotion, because it's irrelevant." Daniel nodded, understood. Ethan learned of this boundary indirectly through counsel. His attorney called him one evening after reviewing updated filings. "She's not pursuing fault," the attorney said. "No infidelity claims, no character challenges." Ethan exhaled. "Then why does it feel like I'm losing everything?" The attorney paused. "Because you're measuring loss against access you assumed, not rights you established." Ethan closed his eyes. The distinction landed heavier than he expected. In the weeks that followed, the structure became undeniable. Joint accounts remained segregated. Access was restored only where legally appropriate and under supervision. Custodial discussions were deferred until after birth as outlined. Medical updates flowed through counsel, filtered and factual. Ethan was no longer central to the process. He was peripheral. Not punished, not erased, repositioned. That subtlety frustrated him more than open conflict would have. There was nothing to argue against, no narrative to dismantle. Olivia had not framed him as a villain. She had framed herself as autonomous. The difference was devastating. One afternoon, Daniel requested a brief in-person meeting. Olivia arrived at his office and took her seat, notebook in hand. "I wanted to confirm something with you," Daniel said. "There's been a suggestion from opposing counsel." Olivia nodded. "Go on." "They're considering requesting a mediated conversation. Informal. No filings, just to clear the air." Olivia did not respond immediately. She considered the phrasing. What would that change, she asked. Daniel shook his head. Nothing legally. It would serve an emotional purpose. "Whose?" Olivia asked. Daniel met her gaze. "Not yours." She nodded once, then no. Daniel smiled faintly. Not approving, not amused, just aligned. Very well. As she stood to leave, Daniel added, "For what it's worth, you've handled this with unusual restraint." Olivia paused at the door. "Restraint implies effort," she said. This was selection. He nodded. "That's often harder." At home that evening, Olivia prepared a small box. She placed inside it items that no longer belonged in her daily life, a spare set of keys documents that had been superseded, a few personal objects she had kept out of habit rather than need. She labeled the box with Ethan's name and set it near the front door. She did not feel bitterness as she did it. She felt closure. Ethan arrived 2 days later to collect it. Daniel had advised that he come when Olivia was not present, but Ethan asked for a brief exchange. Olivia agreed on her terms. He arrived at the appointed time. She opened the door and stepped back, allowing him to enter. The house felt different now, not emptied, but reorganized. He looked around as if expecting to see traces of himself. There were fewer than he remembered. "I won't stay long," he said. "Good," Olivia replied. He picked up the box and hesitated. "I never wanted this to be hostile." "It isn't," Olivia said. He looked up. "It feels like it is." "That's because you're equating access with affection," she replied. "They're not the same." He swallowed. "You could have fought me. You didn't." "I didn't need to," Olivia said. He nodded slowly. "Is there anything I can do?" Olivia considered the question. "Yes," she said. "Respect the process." He nodded again, then turned and left. She closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, not from exhaustion, but from acknowledgement. That chapter had ended without spectacle. And that was enough. Later that night, Olivia sat in the nursery space and reviewed the updated care schedule. She placed new documents in the folder, aligned the edges, and closed it. She rested her hands on her abdomen and felt movement stronger now, more insistent. 2 lives, 2 futures. She had not humiliated anyone to secure them. She had not raised her voice. She had not retaliated. She had simply stepped out of the way and allowed structure to do what structure did best: protect. The final appointment before the 3rd trimester fell on a clear morning. Olivia arrived early, as she always did. The hospital lobby was quieter than usual, sunlight stretching across the polished floor in pale bands. She checked in, accepted the printed badge, and followed the familiar path down the hallway without hesitation. This time, she was not alone. Not because someone walked beside her, but because the process itself moved with her. Aligned, informed, prepared. The staff greeted her by name. The nurse reviewed the chart without questions. Everything that needed to be known had already been communicated. In the exam room, Olivia settled into the chair and waited. The sounds of the hospital filtered in faintly: footsteps, distant voices, the soft chime of an elevator. She rested her hands on her abdomen and breathed evenly. 2 heartbeats answered her calm with their own rhythm. The appointment proceeded efficiently. Measurements confirmed, adjustments noted. The doctor spoke about timelines, expectations, contingency plans. Olivia listened, asked what needed asking, and nodded when answers were sufficient. At the end, the doctor smiled. Not warmly, not formally, but with professional respect. "You're doing well," she said. "Both of you." Olivia thanked her and gathered her things. In the hallway, she paused briefly at a window overlooking the parking structure. The city stretched beyond it, indifferent and expansive. Cars moved. People arrived and left. Life continued without commentary. She took out her notebook and turned to the final page. She wrote 1 line. Care plan confirmed. Moving forward. Then she closed the notebook and placed it back in her bag. Outside, the air was crisp. Olivia stood for a moment near the entrance, adjusting the strap of her coat. She did not scan the area. She did not expect to see anyone. The absence of anticipation felt like a quiet relief. She drove home without music, letting the road unfold ahead of her. The house greeted her with stillness. She set her bag down, removed her coat, and moved through the space with the familiarity of someone who belonged there without question. Later that afternoon, Daniel Whitmore called. All filings are complete, he said. We're now in maintenance mode until delivery. Thank you, Olivia replied. There may be updates from opposing counsel, Daniel added, but nothing that requires immediate response. Understood, she said. He paused. You've done exactly what was needed. Olivia considered that. I did what was appropriate. Yes, Daniel agreed. That's often misunderstood. After the call, Olivia stood by the window again, watching the lights shift as the afternoon passed. She felt movement stronger now, deliberate. She placed a hand over her abdomen, grounding herself in the present. The future was no longer a confrontation to prepare for. It was a sequence to step into. Ethan did not contact her again that week. When he did reach out later through counsel, it was with a question about post-birth scheduling. The tone was neutral, the framing procedural. Olivia reviewed the message and approved Daniel's response without modification. There was no satisfaction in that moment. There was only clarity. The marriage as it had existed was over not because of a single choice, but because of a pattern that had finally been allowed to stand on its own. Olivia did not carry resentment forward. She did not need to. Resentment required ongoing engagement. She had disengaged. In the evenings, she prepared the nursery space with measured care. She assembled what needed assembling. She labeled what needed labeling. She kept things simple. 2 cribs, neutral colors, soft light, nothing excessive. She thought about the future, in practical terms, schedules, support contingencies. She did not imagine confrontations or victories. She imagined mornings, evenings, the steady work of care. One night, as she folded a small blanket and placed it in a drawer, she paused. Not from emotion, but from recognition. The quiet she had cultivated, the silence she had been criticized for, had not been emptiness. It had been space, space to observe, space to decide, space to act without spectacle. She had not raised her voice at the hospital. She had not confronted Ethan in public. She had not exposed Madeline. She had not demanded apologies. She had simply allowed truth to remain where it fell, and then stepped away. The systems around her, medical, legal, financial, had responded not to emotion, but to consistency, to documentation, to sequence. Quiet strength had done what noise could not. Weeks later, as Olivia walked through the park near her home, she passed families with strollers, couples holding hands, individuals walking alone. She noticed them without comparison. Her life was not a cautionary tale or a triumph story. It was a resolved one. She stopped at a bench and sat resting her hands over her abdomen. The twins shifted, asserting presence in ways that felt almost conversational now. I know, she said softly. The wind moved through the trees. Leaves rustled. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Olivia stood and continued walking. She did not look back at the path behind her. There was nothing there that required revision. The future had already begun quietly, deliberately, and on her terms. Some stories don't end with a confrontation. They end with alignment. What Olivia's journey reminds us is that strength is not always loud, and justice is not always dramatic. In a world that often rewards the fastest reaction and the sharpest words, her power came from restraint. She did not argue to be believed. She did not perform pain to be validated. She trusted that truth, when left untouched, has weight of its own. Life doesn't always give us control over how others behave, but it does give us control over what we document, what we tolerate, and when we choose to step back instead of stepping down. Olivia understood something many of us learn. Too late explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you is not generosity, it's delay. There is a quiet courage in letting systems work, in choosing boundaries over battles, and in walking away without demanding applause. That kind of courage doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels lonely. It feels unfinished. But over time, it becomes unshakable. This story is not about wealth or betrayal or even legal victory. It's about timing, about recognizing the moment when speaking more only weakens your position, and when silence paired with preparation becomes the strongest response available. Olivia didn't win because she took revenge. She won because she stopped carrying weight that was never hers to hold. If this story resonated with you, maybe it's because you faced a moment where being calm was harder than being loud. Or because you're learning that dignity doesn't always look like closure. It sometimes looks like walking forward without looking back. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Have you ever experienced a moment where quiet strength changed the outcome of your life? Share your reflections in the comments. I read them all. And if you appreciate stories that explore resilience, accountability, and the kind of justice that unfolds slowly but surely, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are shared when they're ready, meant to be felt, not rushed.